The Power of Experiences in LEGOLAND California with Kurt Stocks. This is episode 1. Carlsbad, People, Purpose, and Impact, an essential podcast for those who live, work, visit, and play in Carlsbad.
Welcome, everybody, to our Carlsbad People, Purpose, and Impact podcast. My name is Brett Schanzenbach. I'm the president and CEO of the Carlsbad Chamber of Commerce, and I'm your host today. I'm very pleased to have with me Kurt Stocks, the president of LEGOLAND California. Good morning, Kurt.
Good morning, Brett. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us. And, we should probably start with the obvious thing right off the bat. You have this super cool accent, which tells everybody you probably didn't grow up here.
No, but where I grew up is not entirely dissimilar to Southern California, and I do sort of feel a little at home here, although it's very much removed from Australia. So I am Australian. I grew up just north of Sydney. Actually, though, before coming to Carlsbad, we were 10 years in Asia. So I've had a bit of a detour from Australia to Southern California.
Awesome. Yeah. Wow. So world traveler. And, and during that time of going from Australia to Asia to Carlsbad, somewhere along the line, you got connected to this magical thing we all call Lego and LEGOLAND and through Merlin Entertainment. How did you first get started into this world of Lego?
Yeah, it wasn't intentional. It was not necessarily something I went after. I've never had a career that was ever leading me towards leading theme parks and hotels and aquariums and water parks. I started my career in the health and fitness industry. I used to work for a company called Fitness First Health Clubs out of Australia, and at one point they were the biggest privately owned health club across the globe. Sort of a product comparison is something similar to the Equinox product that you have here in the US, but it was actually my first job after studying. And eventually I got an opportunity in the business in Australia to go to Asia, and that's what took me to Asia. And I had 6 or so years in the business in Malaysia. And for whatever reason, we were in the process of almost exiting because our business was selling, and it was a good time for us to potentially exit Asia. We'd been there for 6 years. We only went for 2. And then all of a sudden, this opportunity popped up for Legoland Resort in Malaysia. And I had some people call me from the UK, and it took a lot of discussion. It was my first response was, no, that's not for me. Thanks for the call, so on. And they persisted, and quite honestly, the more I understood about not only the business but the Merlin Entertainments Group, taking my eldest son, who was only 3 at the time, to the resort in Malaysia, we just had a blast. And I said, I've got to be a part of this. And then and that's how I got into the industry. And that was only sort of 5 years ago now.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's quite a ride. So it was really your 3-year-old that got you into the business, if we're just honest. We'll
it was. And I still tell the team locally here in California, never forget how powerful our experiences can be, because it was my experience on that day with the staff in Malaysia, the interactions with my son. I said, I've got to be a part of this.
That's awesome. That's funny. So I know I've shared with you before, and I was sharing recently with some of the other staff at Legoland. I have 4 boys, and now all 4 of them, because my youngest is now employed at the park here in Carlsbad, but they've all had a time of working there. But before that, they all had a passion with Lego, with the building blocks and stuff. And so what's funny is because a lot of our friends, they know we have 4 boys and a big family, and so anytime somebody's clearing out their stuff, quote unquote, some big garbage bag or bin full of Legos arrives on our front door, and they're like, hey, we thought you guys could use these. And so we just have this mounting quantity of Lego. It happened again during quarantine. Somebody dropped off a garbage bag full of Lego. But what's interesting, because going back to the eyes of the child, my youngest son, who's a junior in high school, he actually used a lot of his time in quarantine. He developed this whole world out of his own head, out of Lego, and it was actually something that helped him during quarantine, to be honest. So the Lego world is powerful for the young folk.
Absolutely.
So that's so cool that it goes through your 3-year-old partially that got you there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So when you started there in Malaysia, what was your first role? Were you the director of the whole park at that time, or?
Yeah, so I went in a very similar role, albeit on a very different scale. California versus Malaysia, but I went in there as the general manager or general manager equivalent. So we had a theme park, a water park, and one hotel there. It was a relatively new resort. I think it was at the time it was 4 or 5 years old. But yeah, it was a real eye opener. Not just theme parks, but being in leadership position across a hotel, and I was sort of thrust into a world that I probably didn't really expect. Our industry, the nature of what we do in the theme parks, we take the lives of our staff and young children into our hands and we put them on the rides. And I probably didn't have an appreciation for how much focus and intensity and responsibility there was from a safety perspective. And that's something that I learned very quickly. And, it's now part of, I would say, almost the DNA. But that was a big change for me. Lots to get used to coming from fitness industry.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. That is fascinating because I don't think a lot of us who are just patrons take it for granted. But you have a whole different role of being the kind of the guy at the top of the food chain, so to speak. So you started there in Malaysia, and you said that was just 5-6 years ago, and now fast forward, how does this whole opportunity, because we were blessed here. Legoland California opened in 1999, and for most of the time, we've had Peter Ronchetti here guiding the ship. Yep. And Peter's a great guy. Yep. And just a couple of years ago, he retired. That's actually less than a couple of years ago. So, so how did it come up from you being in Malaysia to a relatively young Lego theme park to this one? Is this the most,
absolutely,
the oldest?
It's not the oldest, but it's the biggest, in every metric by a long way.
Okay, so how did that happen that you jumped from there to here?
It was a little bit of timing. It was a little bit of opportunity. I'd like to think that I'd done some good things in Malaysia that positioned me to come here, but I was pretty upfront with Merlin when I joined, and we'd had, like I said, 6 or 7 years in Asia at that time, and we saw another 3 to 5 years maybe. But the nature of the Merlin group and the fact that we were operating, I think at the time, 7 resorts across the world, it was always in the bigger picture for us to probably do one more stop maybe before we go back to Australia at some stage. And as I looked across the portfolio as the new guy, it was sort of California that was probably the one that really grabbed my attention.
Sure.
At that point, I had no idea how big it was. I had no idea the history here, and it's a real juggernaut. But over time, I spoke with Peter a lot because we'd go to meetings and we would always catch up for a beer, and he really talked so passionately about the business here and how exciting it was. And then when he told me one day that he was planning to retire at the end of the year, it was perfect timing for me. And I was more than happy to take the opportunity when it came up.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah. So now let's fast forward, and it was I believe late 2019 when you moved your family.
Yeah, it was January 2020.
January of 2020. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
So here you are, you move your family all across continents to a whole new world, to quote some other theme park, which we won't mention. And and then February, March hits of 2020 and this thing called COVID. So how has that been for your family? Like, it's just your kids, they're uprooted, they're coming to a new environment, and then boom, shut in.
Yeah, it was tough, completely unexpected. For all the things that could have happened when we considered the move to California, this obviously it wasn't even a consideration at the time. So I arrived, I think, mid-January. Family arrived at the end of January after spending some time in Australia, and it was 5-6 weeks later that we were on lockdown, but there was obviously a build-up at that time, and it was becoming pretty evident by mid to late February that there was going to be a challenge at some point. Yeah. Not for a second did we think that we would be closed or locked down for 13 months.
Right.
But out of it all, it's actually my son, our eldest son, who was the only one who was at school at the time, who I actually felt for. And he's a very social kid. He loves his sports. He gets on well with everybody. And the least of our worries moving to the US was him and having to change schools and all that sort of thing. No problem. We didn't see an issue whatsoever. But he's the one that's been most impacted.
Sure.
Because he had 2 weeks of school before they went into remote learning. So he didn't really know anyone. He didn't know the kids. And then all of a sudden he was shut off. So it was difficult, but hey, we've come through it.
Yeah. Well, kids are resilient, and Like, that cannot be an easy thing, but hopefully now that he's getting back into that social aspect, he can make some good friends and do all those things that you expected would have happened a year ago.
Yeah, he's it's just a little bit of a gap in history, I guess, but he's fine now. Back to school, back to sports. It's business as usual.
And then, of course, on the professional side, here you come, whole new park. Yeah. Like you said, it's the mother lode for Legoland. And then a couple months after you get here, I mean, something, as you pointed out, nobody could have predicted, nobody could have anticipated or even planned for. COVID hit. So what was that like for you with Legoland? And, you guys are one of the biggest employers in Carlsbad and in North County. And just walk us through that a little. Yeah, well...
It was a tough period. I guess the benefit we had as a business is that we were operating all over the world. We had businesses in China, we have a resort in Japan, and obviously Malaysia, and they were the early days that's where obviously coronavirus was really picking up early days. It hadn't really come to the US when we were sort of starting to think, well, what if? So fortunately for us, by the time we actually got the word that we needed to shut down, we were pretty well progressed with our planning, and we knew it was coming. Like, again, not do we expect for so long, but we sort of we were almost ready to go when it come to shut down, but we didn't know what was coming.
Yeah. So obviously, there's that whole seasonal staff of your team that comes in from like Memorial Day to Labor Day. That was just gone. But then you have a lot of other staff that's typically there year round. I'm sure some of those had to, I don't know if they were laid off or furloughed or however that works, but I'm sure some of those had to be temporarily put on the sidelines. Have you had any difficulty restaffing up as you've gone to try to reopen?
Well, yeah, it's been a challenge for everyone. Yeah. However, I think we've been a little bit lucky, and I'm happy to explain that. I think, first of all, though, this term furlough, I'd never heard of a furlough before March last year, and I think a lot of people are the same way. And it became front and center in just about every discussion we had for probably 6 months.
Sure.
But you're right. At summer peak, we would normally have around 3,000 staff.
Right.
Obviously a big wave of seasonal staff that would come through. Off peak times, maybe around 2,000 or so. So we were at the time we were gearing up for spring. So it was sort of our second biggest wave of activity for the year. So we were well and truly over 2,000 staff, and a lot of our seasonal, what we call our variable workforce. Obviously, there was no work for them, so we had to separate from them. Fortunately, though, most of our permanent salaried staff, we were able to put on furlough and maintain their benefits.
Nice.
And we did that right throughout. And that's a credit, hopefully, to our planning, but also to the Merlin Group overall that they recognised. A business like ours, you can't replace a lot of the experience and skills that exist in that business quickly. So we knew we had to protect that core workforce, and I think we did that. We saw close to 70% of furloughed staff return.
Nice.
So we had almost 1,200 staff furloughed for 12 months.
Wow.
And to get 70% back was really nice. And then since then we've been recruiting. We had to move very quickly, but fortunately we haven't seen a lot of the same issues that a lot of the industry have seen.
Yeah, well, and like I said, your most recent recruiting netted my youngest son. He's excited.
Yep.
He's a ride operator there, and he's having a lot of fun. And well, and what's interesting, so we know that last summer of 2020 was wiped out.
Yep.
But from my perspective as a parent, my son was 16 last summer, and that would have been his first year with quote unquote a real job.
Yep.
And that opportunity for his age was gone.
Yep.
Nobody from that age got that chance last summer. So here he is now, a year later, getting that first chance. So he's loving it, which is really, really fun.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we had a really exciting grand opening on May 27th of Lego Movie World. And I know it was like a year coming because we were I think it was about a week away from it opening in 2020 before the shutdown order came. But super exciting. So tell us about the new Lego Movie World.
Yeah, well, as you mentioned, we were almost ready to go in 2020. And I guess out of all this, that could be one of our lucky breaks that we didn't go ahead and get everything launched and then go into shutdown. So Lego Movie World is alive, and it's obviously been launched, and we've had a really successful launch campaign just ahead of Memorial Weekend, and the land itself, it's the biggest investment that we've put inside the park since we opened in 1999. So to be able to take something as iconic and powerful and loved as the Lego Movie franchise and put it into theme park mode, if you will, has been a really exciting exercise, and we're pretty proud of what we've got.
Yeah, I agree with you that it is a beloved movie series. The movies are just a kick and so popular, and I think this will go really well. And it's interesting because you mentioned it's the biggest investment in the park with inside the park since it opened. But that process of reinvesting and reinventing yourself, and whether it's a small piece or that never ends for you as a theme park.
No, it doesn't. Our business is very capital heavy in terms of investments, new investments for new attractions like Lego Movie World, but also development of the resort. So new business development opportunities, additional hotels, additional gates like our Sea Life Aquarium. What other opportunities are out there for us? So, I think that's forward thinking, but then also from a capital perspective, our resort is enormous, and rides are not cheap to maintain. Lego bricks are not cheap to maintain, and they're not cheap to rebuild and replace. So, we spend an enormous amount when it comes to what we call brand health, maintenance, capital investments year on year. It's not just sort of what you see in the newspaper every day. It's a lot of behind the scenes stuff as well.
Yeah, and it never ends. So at this point, how are you feeling, like hotel occupancy coming back, and how that is looking to project into the summer? How is it looking at the moment?
Well, it's looking very good, all things considered. It was only middle of February, really, that we were having pretty honest conversations that we may not get open in 2021. Wow. We were close to 12 months closed down at that point. We're on the back end of that second stay-at-home order, which sort of tipped over into the new year. And then all of a sudden, things started to move in the right direction, and we got our hotels open in middle of February, albeit on a restricted basis, and we started to do some makeshift park activities, which were very popular because people just wanted to get out of the house, and then we got the word that from the 1st of April we may have a chance to open. So it all happened incredibly quickly for us. But as things stand now, our hotel bookings are phenomenal, and we're seeing extremely strong pace against what we had in 2019. Our park is still restricted in terms of capacity, so it's we're selling the tickets that we've got available, which is great, but it's very hard to get a read on what the true recovery is, and I don't think it'll be until end September, early fall that we get a real sense of where we are against 2019.
Sure. Well, it was very exciting to be at the Lego Movie World grand opening, and I've shared this with other folks. I know you're new to Carlsbad, but I only got to my role here a year before you did, and I've been doing a lot of study and analysis, and really I think that Legoland is kind of the linchpin to the entire region's tourism industry.
Yep.
And as I study, I've done some of my own analysis, and since LEGOLAND California opened in 1999, we've had 1.5 hotels open every year since, and continuing if you take like about a 10-mile radius around Legoland. I mean, it just drives so much. You already mentioned how many people you staff and employ, but all the hotels that feed into it, all the restaurants that benefit from those hotel guests, downtown Carlsbad's full with Carlsbad Village is full with these boutique retail shops that cater to those tourists as well. So being there and just feeling the energy and the excitement of the Lego Movie World opening, you almost felt like it was like a fresh breath for the whole regional economy, to be honest. And it's exciting to see.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's great to feel the optimism again that we all felt. And then, coming full cycle back to a personal question. When I was doing some research, it looked like you had a little bit of a passion for cycling. Did I find that out there?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, that's I do. I still ride. Wow. So when I used to play rugby.
Okay.
So I grew up playing sports. I played golf and tennis. I played cricket in Australia, but my sport was rugby, and I played at a pretty high level, and I played professionally when I finished school and so on. And for whatever reason, I finished up. I was relatively early when I retired because I'd had some injuries. I sort of had work opportunities that were coming up, and I said, okay, it's time to finish that up. And one of the first things I did was I bought a bike. I wanted to get into, I bought a road bike. I wanted to get into triathlons and so on. And I got right into that, and I loved it. And I did some half Ironman triathlons. And
Nice.
But I wasn't really enjoying swimming and running.
Yeah.
I love riding, and I realized I was doing it all so I could ride my bike. So I said, let's get rid of the swimming and running, and I got into my road cycling. I used to ride a lot of criterium racing and so on. It was good fun.
Well, hopefully, I mean, you've come to the right place to continue that hobby. I mean, depending on how much time between family and work you get to do that, when that opportunity arises, this should be a great place to continue that hobby.
Absolutely. I've got myself a gravel road bike here, so a gravel bike, jumping down into the trails and all that. It's wonderful. And I'm an early morning guy, so I do most of my exercise before the family wakes up. So I'm out and done before they even open their eyes.
So you got that, you find that time, that slice that works for you, so that you can do that and keeps you kind of sane, and then you can get to the family responsibilities, work, and all that kind of stress. So that's great. I'm similar. I'm a morning person. Knock that out first, and then the rest of the day kind of it just settles in. So that's great. Well, we're very excited to see Legoland get back on track. Oh, and I did want to ask, typically 4th of July is a big day of celebration in the Legoland. So what kind of things are you expecting this year? You guys going to have fireworks again? And
yeah, we are. Absolutely, as long as the city approves us. No, we will have fireworks. We call it Red, White, and Boom, and I think that's what it's always been called here. So I haven't seen it yet. So this will be my first proper July 4th, but absolutely full steam ahead with that. Particularly now the states ease those restrictions, and we'll be unrestricted from 15th of June. So
I think one of my sons told me that is the single busiest day in the park, typically, I think, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, so 4th of July, absolutely. It's our longest trading day. It's obviously, peak summer, but then it's pretty sustained from the back end of June through to almost September.
Sure. Yeah. Well, very exciting to see this come back to life. Really appreciate you taking the time to come and chat with us about all this. And we look forward to all things Lego.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Kurt.